Welcome to This Explainer. You know, accounting really isn't just about math. It's literally the universal language of global business. And hey, like any spoken language, it's got to evolve to survive, right? Today, we're diving into a massive shift in how we record the financial world, the crucial transition from traditional Indian accounting standards, or AS, to the modern, globally aligned IND-AS system. This isn't just some boring regulatory update. It's a fundamental game changer in how corporate stories are told, verified, and ultimately trusted. Let's get into it.
So let's kick things off with the central friction of modern commerce. What actually happens when local business rules collide with a highly globalized world? Picture this. A tech firm in Mumbai is pitching institutional investors in London or Tokyo. They absolutely cannot afford a translation error in their financials. They need a unified, instantly recognizable baseline. This friction, this desperate need for absolute clarity across borders, was the ultimate catalyst that forced traditional, isolated accounting methods to adapt, or frankly, die out.
Section 1. The Old Language of Business. Traditional AIS worked perfectly fine back in the day. It was designed for its era. Decades ago, commerce was pretty contained. Supply chains were shorter, mostly domestic. Cross-border financial instruments, like those super complex derivatives we see today, were practically non-existent for the average firm. For that localized ecosystem, the traditional AIS did exactly what it needed to do. It kept the local books balanced. But isolation isn't a viable long-term strategy. As borders began to blur financially, the old language just kind of lacked the vocabulary to describe modern multinational realities.
Moving on to Section 2. Rules versus principles.
Okay, to really grasp the sheer magnitude of this shift, we've got to define the frameworks that eventually took over. Globally, the financial world began aligning under IFRS, that's International Financial Reporting Standards. These aren't just minor little tweaks. They're broad, overarching, principle-based guidelines meant to totally harmonize global markets. And India's specific response to this massive global wave? That's IND-AS, a tailored, converged version of those international standards specifically for the Indian market.
Now here is the fundamental divide. The old Indian AS was strictly rule-based. It was driven entirely by the legal form of a transaction. Basically, under that system, if you signed the paper and checked the legal box, boom, you were compliant, regardless of what was actually happening economically. But IFRS and IND-AS, they totally flip the script. They are principle-based. They rip away all that legal paperwork to look at the substance, meaning what is the actual economic reality of what just went down. It fundamentally shifts the burden of proof from just checking legal boxes to uncovering the real economic truth. This phrase right here, focus on the substance over the legal form, is the absolute DNA of modern accounting. By demanding that corporate books reflect true economics instead of just clever legal structuring, businesses can no longer hide behind contractual loopholes or shady shell structures. If a transaction functions like debt, guess what? It gets recorded as debt, no matter what highly creative title the lawyer slapped on the contract. The numbers are finally forced to tell the genuine, unvarnished financial story. That brings us to Section 3, Expanding Scope and Transparency.
Because of this aggressive drive to uncover true economic reality, the new rules simply had to be incredibly pervasive. Unlike the old localized system, which, let's be honest, had some pretty severe blind spots, IFRS and IND-AS leave absolutely no stone unturned. They cast this massive, comprehensive net that covers every single area of financial reporting. We're talking revenues, expenses, the exact fair value valuation of assets, liabilities, and equity. The end goal here? Complete 100% visibility. Nothing gets left in the dark.
So the whole evolutionary leap really comes down to this core progression. We completely abandon a narrow, rigid, legalistic approach for broad, flexible economic principles. We moved from isolated, limited rules to a highly pervasive scope. And, this is the real game changer for investors, we upgraded from minimal reporting to incredibly detailed, multifold disclosures. This wasn't an accident, folks. It was a highly calculated global move to enforce total transparency and accountability across international markets.
Now for Section 4, the globalization push.
Why did this have to happen? Well, the sheer unprecedented complexity of our modern world basically made this change non-negotiable. You just can't have an integrated global economy if every country is keeping score differently, right? Comprehensive standards like IFRS create that vital international compatibility. It means an institutional investor sitting in New York can pull up a balance sheet from a manufacturing company in Mumbai and confidently compare it to one in Berlin. It's a perfect apples-to-apples comparison. This fundamentally reduces investment risk and, ultimately, greases the wheels of global capital. Which leads us to our final act, Section 5, India's Smart Convergence Strategy.
Now, this is absolutely crucial. India didn't just blindly copy and paste IFRS over its own system. Doing that, adopting international rules without filtering them through the specific realities of the Indian economic scenario, that would have been a disaster. Think about it. A rigid financial standard built to regulate a highly mature, slow-growing European market might completely misrepresent the explosive growth dynamics and unique structural realities of an emerging market like India. They absolutely had to customize things to protect their domestic ecosystem. And this is where India's convergence strategy truly shines as a brilliant filtration process. When sweeping changes are proposed to international IFRS, they don't just automatically hit Indian accounting books the very next day. No way. Instead, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs steps in as a strategic gatekeeper. They rigorously analyze these global changes piece by piece, and they only incorporate them into the local Ind AS if they genuinely make sense for the Indian context. It's a perfectly precise calibration between global alignment and domestic reality. By acting as that strategic filter, India really found a brilliant middle ground. And it leaves us with a fascinating dynamic to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. How do modern nations balance the absolute necessity of global financial trust with the fierce protection of their own local economic sovereignty? It's a tough balancing act, but one that defines the very future of global business. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.